Greetings, traveler. New camera today, so let me know what you think. Now, you might have heard lots of people talking over the internet, over presentations and books about organized methods to game design. Essentially, what this means is having a plan about how you're going to approach designing the overall features of the game, how you're going to test them, how to release them, and so on. And you might have also experienced a more spontaneous type of game design. The type where you're just sitting down, playing around with a few tools or ideas, and basically making things as you go. But which one is better, and which one is most suitable to be used in a professional or at least more focused development environment? Today, I want to dive into that. If you don't know who I am, my name is Xanthos. I've been working in the games industry for about 15 years now, mainly on game design. I've worked on IP such as FIFA, Star Ocean, Rage of Bahamut, Idolmaster, and a few others. And in my experience, surprising as it might seem, I have never actually seen the academic use of game design being used. I have always worked with people who are pretty spontaneous in the way they create games. So today what I want to do is dive into what each one actually looks like when you're in the day-to-day development cycle, and which one I think is best for a professional development environment. So let's define terms first. For academic kind of game design, I mean something like what you see in a presentation or in a book. Maybe a famous game designer outlines their method, and then you try to replicate it. Or you've seen a design method from something else, maybe the design of everyday things, maybe the design of furniture or applications or buildings and so on. And you think, well, I like this approach. It seems pretty organized and easy to follow, so I'll use it for my game design. That's typically what I refer to with the more academic approach. The spontaneous approach is probably what you end up doing when you're playing around with a new game prototype. You fire up a game engine, you either load one of the templates that are already there, or you have an idea for testing out some physics-based gimmick and so on. That looks pretty fun. So you start playing around with that, and you basically define what this game is going to be as you go. So there's no clear plan in the beginning. You're just following the fun, essentially. And let me just be clear here in saying that there's no right and wrong here. It's just my observation about what I found to work best in a professional working environment. So specifically, when we were working back in Electronic Arts with one of the titles there, we had to deliver a very specific kind of product. We knew what the product is supposed to be. Probably you're aware of it already. But we didn't have a specific map of how to get there. So there was no specific directive as to what the game should and should not include, what the gameplay should be like. Would it be more action-based, or would it be more strategic and manager style? We had none of those directives. And what we ended up doing was coming up with a few ideas, trying them out, checking them with people around us, with the game director and the producer and the studio boss and so on. And we were trying to figure out exactly what would be good for this game, what kind of gameplay, what kind of game design would serve it best. Needless to say that process, despite being able to generate many good ideas, was extremely difficult to navigate. So what we did next was try to implement all these ideas, which each one of them was so complex that it took us a really long time to get to the implementation. And even when we did, there was a lot of hit and misses with each feature, and we had no idea how to pick the parts of the implementation that we liked and refactor all the other ones and basically try to refine them. Especially the match part where the player is supposed to spend all his time and do battles against other players. that is the hottest, most contested part of gameplay, right? You want to know if the team you build is good. So you want that part of the game to feel as good as possible and as rewarding as possible. However, by following this approach of sort of doing what works and coming up with new ideas for subsequent versions and so on, we didn't manage to find easily some sort of core gameplay loop that would satisfy most people. And there's many mistakes that we did there, and looking back, there's this and that we could have fixed. But the important thing I think here is that this approach lends itself to basically getting lost easily. So the result of that was we had a very mixed sort of feedback for that version of the game, and we didn't know what else to do. None of the other game designers there, and honestly, none of the game designers I have ever worked with had any idea about a more, let's say, organized and methodical approach to game design, both the original ideas and how you would go about testing them to see that what you made actually appeals to the players. So I want to contrast that with the same situation essentially, but with one key difference with that we're calling academic game design in this case. Imagine if we were in the same situation, but we had a clear map of what the game is supposed to be, what we want it to be in the end, and what the core mechanics should be. So a clear idea of what the core gameplay loop should be, how the player should start, where the player would use all his resources, how the player would improve over time, and why would he want to monetize in the game, or buy more items in the game, or buy more of the game, and so on. And you might think, well, isn't that what all games do? You start with a general idea and then you refine it as you go. See, that is the insidious trap that I think exists in this kind of situation. Thinking that, yes, of course, we'll refine it as we go, is precisely the kind of thinking that got us into a world of trouble. So what would be so different about taking the academic approach, and what would that look like? So if we were to go back and rework on that project again, this is, I think, how having a more organized method, a more academic approach to this would help us. First of all, we would clearly define what we want the final game to be. And honestly, it doesn't matter if we went with a more turn-based approach, or a more action-based approach, or a manager-style game where you just manage resources and you don't take part in the action itself. I think that all of these are fine. There's nothing fundamentally wrong. Now, of course, there's certain playstyles that suited that IP better, but we've seen time and time again unorthodox approaches to established game genres that work pretty well. So just like you have action games that, for example, convey the feeling of medieval combat quite well, just as well you could have a grand strategy game that also delivers on the fantasy of medieval combat, and you could also have a more tactics-based approach where you decide the actions for a small group of heroes on a, let's say, second-to-second, moment-to-moment basis without it being action-based. So there's nothing right and wrong about this. It's just about picking an approach, something that the team feels comfortable with and that matches the IP, and sticking with it to see it through. And then once you have decided that, it's simply a matter of deciding ahead of time which features are necessary and providing a logical explanation for it, right? So, for example, if you're imagining a gameplay loop where the player for the first part of the game, maybe the first month or two, is going through the game and clearing some missions or some matches against the AI just to learn the game and to develop a basic set of items and skills and so on. And then the player is supposed to take on human opponents, trying to go to a world championship or a world tournament or something, then you have a clear path set for the player. And just by making this tiny decision, right, going from we'll make something fun to let's make the first part of the game where the player learns about the game, and then later on let's try to lead the player to a higher and higher skill level so he can take on the best players in the world out there. As soon as you say that, you probably hearing this have an idea in your mind about some good steps to take in that direction. And that is the key, the direction. So there's nothing to say that coming up with fun ideas and experimenting with crazy prototypes is wrong. Of course it's not. But when you get to the professional environment, then I think, in my experience, as I've seen time and time again, having a direction for where you want to go is what makes all the difference. If I had to put a visual to it, I would say something like this. Imagine you're lost in the desert and you know you only have so many days of food and water left. You could randomly look around and look at the sand dunes around you and choose to explore some of them. See, maybe there's a city behind them or an oasis or something, or a road. And if you don't find one, just look at the next one and then at the next one. So assuming you don't actually know the terrain around you and you have no idea where the nearest city could be, then picking a direction and sticking with it is a vastly better strategy than just going back and forth and retracing your steps and trying a new direction and then changing your mind and going back again and essentially moving in circles. So that situation sounds absurd. And when you think about in the desert scenario, you think, well, yeah, at least making it far away from where you are is a better chance than like going in circles, of course. But when we're stuck in day-to-day game development, we're in the trenches, right? Sometimes it's hard to see the big picture. So what I've noticed with my experience recently being able to apply this method to my own games now is that will the academic method automatically produce a massively popular game? Well, I mean, it's entertainment, so nothing is guaranteed in that sense. I haven't seen anybody who can produce successful games and successful movies on a 100% success rate. But what I can tell you is that having this direction and having this clear image of what we're moving towards makes us unconsciously even take steps towards it. But if we're second guessing every single step of the way, thinking, is this feature good? Maybe we should scrap it. Maybe we should make the game fast-paced, or fast-paced is not working. Let's go back to a strategic approach, or maybe we should make a dinosaur game instead, or maybe an idle game instead. That is exactly the kind of walking in circles that I think can cost a huge amount of time and frustration, and has been the downfall of many, many game projects that I have personally experienced. So to put it all together, I think there's nothing wrong with trying out crazy ideas and prototypes. I think it's a lot of fun. And in fact, I think it's necessary because that's how you discover new ground to explore in game design. You mess with something that looks silly, but it reveals to you some very interesting angle that you can make a game on. So I think that's great. And when the time comes to put this in a more organized project, that's when having a clear goal for what you're aiming for can be a huge lifesaver. Because even if you manage to get to a situation where you think, you know what, this wasn't good after all, and this feature that looked fun in the beginning doesn't really work in the real world, then at least because the direction is there, because you have a target you're trying to hit, you can make an educated judgment whether this direction is going to get you there or not. So even if you choose to cancel early or try a different project, then you have a logical reason at least behind it, and you avoid all these crazy game development conversations of everybody saying we should do this, we should do that, and nobody committing to a specific approach, and having no way to quantify which of these ideas are good and which will just lead you to more circles. Anyway, that's my experience so far. I hope it helps at least one other traveler out there who is in this situation right now and trying to figure out what is the best way to organize all these ideas into something executable. I know it's a deep topic, and I imagine you have questions about this, so I would love to hear about your situation and, if possible, offer my viewpoint on it. Anyway, that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you think of this new camera, and as always, have fun.